For more on Wang Yi's speech to the UN Security Council, I'm joined now by Anthony Moretti from the Department of Communication and Organizational Leadership at the Robert Morris University. Give us your thoughts on Wang Yi arriving in New York, going to the United Nations, and his efforts there, and the stewardship over the Security Council over the last month or so.
Well, let me start with the second part of that question. I think Dennis Francis hit the nail right on the head when he said that, let's face it, it was China that was able to get this resolution across the line. And I think although similarities are always a little bit dangerous and perhaps not always on solid footing, we saw the same thing with China and the Middle East, particularly relating to Saudi Arabia and Iran a couple of months ago. What I think is key to this, perhaps more so than anything else, you go to the United Nations to state clearly and unequivocally what your position is. And China's position was stated very clearly: ceasefire, aid without any conditions, and a two-state solution. That's China's, for lack of a better word, markers in the sand. If anybody thinks, if any other country thinks there's a better solution, they need to come up with one. And quite frankly, there isn't a better one.
And so how do you advance that? I mean, a month of leadership there at the UN Security Council. How do you move the ball forward? Because this is such a dicey issue, and it's been so for decades.
It is, and events like today, prominent speeches, prominent events, anniversaries, etc. Those are sort of what I'll call sort of forward-facing events, meaning there's a lot of media attention, a lot of public attention. What has to happen now in many ways is the real hard work, the work where the media camera or the television cameras are not there, the journalists might not necessarily be there. You're in a room with a group of people who must be committed to the same goal. And when they get into that room, whether the Chinese are leading the meeting or part of the meeting, they know that the Chinese statement is, again, going to be ceasefire, uninhibited aid, and two-state solution. And if those are the parameters upon which serious conversations take place, it doesn't necessarily mean those conversations will be easy, but there will be clear and identifiable markers of success if those are met.
Anthony, you've heard all the criticism, and it's been going on now for years. There was Syria, there's Ukraine, now we're seeing Gaza. That the Security Council just seems it can't really move. It can't really make any headway when it comes to these global conflicts. What's your take on that, and what needs to happen to kind of change that, do you think?
One of the things that has bothered me, and I'll use a U.S. example, and you're certainly aware of this, I think you and I have talked about this at least once, is the overall decay in the respect of institutions. Congress, the presidency, the Supreme Court in the United States. I mean, no institution is perfect. That's not my point. But when you continue to decay and believe or erode the credibility of an institution, then you begin to hear the whispers of, well, the UN can't do the job, the Supreme Court can't do the job, etc. Nonsense. The United Nations can do this job. It can lead both from the front and from behind. What it needs, it's all of its member states acknowledging that the tough work often means compromise. Compromise often means you get a little less than you wanted and I get a little less than I wanted. But it's ultimately not about you and me. It's about everything that surrounds it. And so if that is the framework that these conversations moving forward take place under, again, we've got a chance to see some credible activity and some credible successes building from them.
Anthony, when you look at the UN, it's sort of like an aircraft carrier. You can't turn it around quickly. But talk to us about China. How is it changing the United Nations? And obviously, we look at it in incremental steps, I would think.
Yeah, fairly or unfairly, there's a perception that the United Nations was owned, a carefully chosen word, but at least that the West had its perhaps majority, not over majority, the overwhelming amount of influence. I think what we're beginning to see in the 21st century, we are seeing in the 21st century, is this notion of a sort of one view of how the entire world has to come together is now being questioned. And China's philosophy is not, look, blow it all up. No, that's not what China is saying. What China is saying is, look, there's plenty of room for there to be competing ideas, ideas that lead to fresh conversations, new and a different set of eyes on ideas. And so, yes, moving the United Nations is not easy. You're not going to turn it around like it's a little ship in the ocean. It's going to take a long time to see meaningful progress. But again, slow and steady wins this race. And as long as we don't anticipate, major advances every single day, we're in good shape.
Anthony Moretti joining us from the U.S. state of Pennsylvania. Thank you so much for your insights.